Heyo, welcome everyone to episode 100 of Today in the Scene. It's crazy that we got here. I'm really excited we're here. But I'm Joe with Indie Arcade Wave, and I just want to say thank you for checking us out. If you like what we're doing here at Indie Arcade Wave, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us a ton. And I would really like to know what episode you guys found us on. Like, what was it that brought you into the wave? And just tell me why you're staying along with us. This week, we're going to jump into an indie arcade bar that you guys have probably heard about. I've interviewed Mark three, maybe four times now, about Wonderville Arcade in Brooklyn. And this place is just such a unique space in the arcade scene, arcade bar. And it's got all indie games. Like nothing in there is from a major producer. They're all from small developers, a lot of them in the New York area. And we'll just bring Mark in here and talk about it. How you doing, Mark?
Hey, Joe. How's it going?
It's fantastic. I'm super excited to be at episode 100. Actually, when I started this whole thing, I said I'm going to do 100 episodes and see how it goes. And I got to 100, and it's fun. I'm just going to keep going. So let's just jump into who Mark Kleeb is. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. Basically, introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hey, my name's Mark. I'm a co-owner of Wonderville, which is an arcade bar in New York. I also am a fabricator. I've been building arcades for like 12 years now, which is kind of crazy to say. But after, I guess, 9 years of moving arcades around, my wife and I launched a Kickstarter to open Wonderville in 2019. So we just passed year 3. We had a couple of weird years in there with COVID and everything, but things are going pretty smoothly these days. And yeah, I'm really happy to be back on the show. Congratulations. I think I've listened to every episode. It's really exciting to hear about all the other, arcade spaces all around the country. So thank you for having this podcast.
Thank you for coming on. I mean, I appreciate that. It means a lot to me with you being like, I said before the interview, I swear everyone I talk to in the space of like building their own arcade or arcade cabinet and making their own indie game, they always go to you. Like you're the guy that knows how to build the cab, helps people figure it out, and gets everything moving. But let's jump in first with Wonderville. Like tell us the story of how that all came to be, because it's got to be like 50 episodes now since we talked about it. So there are a lot of new people watching. So tell us how Wonderville came to be.
Yeah. So back in 2014, I was living in a warehouse in Brooklyn called Death by Audio, and built a MAME cabinet, a multi-arcade machine emulator, and eventually started meeting people from, NYU Game Center and Parsons, and building these custom arcade cabinets for their games. Then in 2014, Death by Audio closed, and we ended up with this collection of, at that time, was about 6 arcade cabinets, which sort of became this weird traveling circus. So we, would partner with other venues and offices and art galleries and move them around. I drove a lot of box trucks during those 5 years until finally our friends owned this bar, which was also an event space. They had bands play there. And they said, we're trying to sell this place. Are you guys interested? We know you do the arcade thing. So we said, yes, but we can't afford it. So we did a Kickstarter in 2019, and we surpassed the goal. So we were able to buy the business from them, and we transformed it into what is now Wonderville, which I like to describe as a bar, an indie arcade, and an event space. So there's a lot going on there. And yeah, we just celebrated our 3rd birthday this past June. So things are moving along. It's really great. And yeah, I can't wait for the future.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what else you guys get in there, because it seems like every time I look into your page, like whether it be Instagram or your website, you guys are bringing something new in there. And I think we came to the conclusion that you have 23 games in there with a couple like cabinets that have multiple games. What indie projects really stand out to you in the arcade? Like what cabinets, I mean, maybe it's gameplay, maybe it's the control scheme. What really is like the 3 or 4 games that are like, this one is really unique to me?
Yeah. Oh man, it's hard because I feel like I don't know. It's like a collection of things that all work really well together. I want to talk first, which is like my pet project. I'm not really a game developer. I like to partner with developers, and we build a cabinet for the game that they have finished. But I was on the boardwalk in Asbury Park, New Jersey, and we went to the Pinball Museum, my wife Stephanie and I kept seeing all these like AC/DC pinball and Metallica pinball. And my friend Oliver was in this band, A Place to Bury Strangers, and their stage show was, strobe lights and fog machines and lasers. And I was like, those guys would have a really awesome pinball machine. And it was sort of this pipe dream until a friend of mine said, I have this 1959 Gottlieb pinball machine I've been trying to rework, and I don't really know what to do with it. Do you want it? And then this project was born. And this was like back in 2015, 2016. And we repainted it. We redid all the electronics. So many people worked on this. We had 3 people on the software team, 3 electrical engineers, like 2 artists. Someone did sound effects. It was a massive team, and it lives at Wonderville now. So it's A Place to Bury Strangers pinball. There's a fog machine in it. There's lasers and strobes, and just like their stage show. So I think that's probably, one of the things I'm most proud of is that thing continues to keep working, because pinballs, it's always maintenance. But I think it's the only one of its kind, and I don't know if I'll ever do another one. It's a lot of work. But me personally, I'm looking into like alternative interfaces. A lot of traditional arcades are joysticks and buttons. And I really like things like Black Emperor with the rotary wheel. I think it's new and different. There's a game we have called Hairna, which is played with a Microsoft Kinect. It's hands-free, so you kind of wave your hands to play it. And I'm sort of thinking a lot about games that can only exist in the arcade, as opposed to games that, maybe you could get it on consoles and then there's an arcade version. So that's what's really exciting to me.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right with the pinball. That's such a cool thing to be able to build a pinball for your friend's band, have one of a kind, and Black Emperor has a great controls. Like I love the longboard wheel. It feels so fluid, so smooth, and the story of how it came to be, like with Tomas, who I did talk to about that was really cool. That he was like, he's already in film. And he's like, I'm going to make an arcade game. The first game he makes while he's going to school for it gets picked up by Bumble Bear, and they're like, let's do something with this. You've been working on games constantly, it seems like. Like every time I look in your Instagram, there's a new game, and I just saw this really cool wedding gift that you made. So tell us a little bit more about that and what the process of building that was like.
Yeah. So Neil Sveri had a game called Super Sharp Birds. We built a cabinet for that game earlier this year, in early 2022. And his roommate said, my friends are getting married, and the groom, Luke, has always talked about building an arcade. So I'd love to commission a custom arcade cabinet with a custom wedding game for him. And, at first I was like, wow, this is a really big project. Like, I'm happy to build the cabinet for you, but game development is a big endeavor. And I started thinking about the games we had, because she was also like, what if it had a bunch of games in it, and also this wedding game? And I thought about the Pico 8 platform, because we have a cabinet at Wonderville which has a lot of Pico 8 games in it. It runs on a Raspberry Pi. So the cost to build it is not as big as if you had a desktop Windows machine in it. So we went down that road. She found this guy, Johan, on Twitter, who created this amazing game that had the bride and groom in pixel art. It was a collaborative platformer. You had to stand on a button to allow the other person to walk through a door. So it's really adorable. And I gave them 30 other Pico 8 games, and they brought it to the wedding this past weekend. And so it was really, really adorable. I'm glad I got to work on it. And that's how that happened.
Yeah, I saw the cab. It was really cool. It was super cute. And the way that the game played together, I thought that was really cool as a cooperative platformer, because you don't find a lot of cooperative platformers. They're mostly one-player games. I'm thinking of, is it called It Takes Two? Was one of the big indie ones that came out in the last couple of years, which I thought was an absolute blast. The game was great. And I'm just scrolling through your website right now, looking at all these games. let's just talk about the indie space in general. Like you're in New York, you're in Brooklyn. It's about there's a lot of people, a lot of developers, and you teach classes there. So what's teaching the indie space like to see all these games coming out of your students?
Yeah, it's really exciting. So we work with the NYU Game Center at Wonderville. We have an intern this semester at Ziru Hu, and Ziru's bringing in one showcase per month. So this month it's going to be October 30th, and it's Halloween themed. So Ziru is basically finding a bunch of indie Halloween games, and we're going to set them up for the night. And so it's really cool to get to meet other developers from the Game Center. Some games are really esoteric, some games are really arcadey, and so it's really interesting to see a mix of games that come out of there. But funny enough, I actually don't teach in that department. I teach at ITP, which is more of an art school. It's part of Tisch at NYU. And so I have a class that happens in the spring called the New Arcade. And my students do 7 weeks of Unity game development. Their midterm is a custom controller that they make. And then the second half of the semester, they get into groups and they make an arcade cabinet and they learn Fusion 360. They learn how to use CNC machines and they do the whole fabrication. So that's really exciting. I hadn't taught it since 2019 because of the pandemic. And I had a class this past spring and it was really phenomenal. The students' work was out of this world. The games were super interesting and super fun. Actually, Bite Ball is one of the cocktail tables and that we have at Wonderville right now. So yeah, it's really cool to be able to kind of, I don't know, be a part of cultivating new arcades as part of like a class project.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I wish I had a class like that when I was in college. It would have been really nice to take a class more focused around video games and arcades in the space, rather than some of the essential classes or I don't even remember what they called them, that just felt like a waste of time to me. Let's talk about the indie space in general. Like, what have you noticed in the last, I don't know, you said 2019, so 3-4 years. You've been doing it longer than that. What have you noticed in the last like 5 to 7 years in the indie space that really makes you excited for the future, but also surprised you? I feel like the space has grown pretty fast.
Yeah. When I first started doing this, there wasn't like a lot of resources for people building arcades unless they were MAME cabinets. And so when I first started building back in 2010, I was looking at a lot of MAME builds. And now I feel like every major city has someone doing custom arcade work, which is really exciting. And I also think, the proliferation of woodworking and Arduino and like being able to create custom electronics and like 3D printing these cool enclosures has led to all of these really interesting interfaces. Like Alt Control at GDC has blown up. And that's been really exciting to see because you get these games that you play with like crazy wings or like these things that you move around on a table, and they're not really arcade cabinets, but they're these games that are cooperative or collaborative, and they're made with these custom interfaces. And I think that's been the most exciting thing to see is like, what can people make with, not necessarily building a game and then attaching joysticks and buttons, but creating a new experience that is a game that you can play in a public space.
Yeah, I think it's really cool to see all these alternative controls. I mean, obviously like Black Emperor, and you got Typing Party. I'm blanking on the name. I'm so sorry if you're watching this video, but there's a guy who follows along who made a game where it's you basically put your hands like in this sleeve. It's weird, and you go up and down, and there's sensors in it, and that's how you move your ship.
Oh, yeah.
I'll find it and I'll send it to you, Mark. But it's really cool to see people developing games and then creating controls as a mechanic of the game, as opposed to just being like, okay, what can I do with this controller? Like I've got the Xbox controller. What can I do with this? It's really cool to see something different coming out of it. Now, obviously, as I said earlier, you're kind of the guy when it comes to people that have developed games and want to start building an arcade cabinet. They usually go to Wonderville's Discord and ask you questions. So what kind of advice would you give to someone who is building maybe their first cabinet for a game that they've been developing for a while? What advice would you give them to kind of get over that initial fear of, I don't know if I can do this?
Yeah, well, I would say, it's not as hard as you might think. There are maybe barriers to access a space where you can cut plywood, right? And I think that was something that I had access to that allowed me to, build something a little bigger than I could normally do in a New York City apartment. So, if you know somebody that has access to a wood shop or someone who might be excited to like work on a cabinet, I would say an arcade cabinet isn't much different than just building a wooden box. It's just a wooden box with, curves on it. And you don't have to build something that's absolutely pristine. If you can put a screen and a computer and some buttons and joysticks into like an unpainted, even cardboard box, and you can put it in front of people, you can start getting feedback on your game as an arcade experience versus, giving someone a controller. It's a much different experience when it's in the arcade.
So, past the woodworking part, what advice would you give to someone that wants to build their cabinet? Like, what would you say is a good platform? Obviously, like we've got Raspberry Pi. You can go with the Windows route. You can go with a MAME cabinet. What would you advise people to go with, kind of as their first practice shot, I guess?
So I'm kind of like platform agnostic. If there's a good game, it's a good game, no matter if it's like Unity or Unreal or Godot or Pico 8. Like every platform can yield a really good arcade game. Unfortunately, for a lot of games, they don't run on ARM processors, which is what Raspberry Pi is. But I guess with the price of Raspberry Pis these days, it's not much different than just getting a Windows PC. So we use like Intel NUC or Gigabyte Bricks, those little mini PCs running like Windows 10 for most of the machines. But at the same time, my students just stuck their own laptop in the cabinet when they were showing it, and that's totally fine. So I would say if you're already working on a game, just keep working on it with whatever platform that you're already developing in, because there's no ideal software for an arcade cabinet. The game is going to be whatever you're comfortable developing in. I will say, if you haven't started designing your game and you want to think about the controls at the like brainstorming phase, I think that's a really good idea because it allows you to kind of make it part of the gameplay experience. We have a game called Powerboat Italia 88. It's a boat race, but the mechanics of it are tapping 2 arcade buttons as fast as you can to accelerate. And that had to be designed with the arcade in mind. Like you couldn't do that on an Xbox controller. So that game only exists in its arcade form. And that's a really cool feature because you have to find a Powerboat Italia cabinet to play it. And so it would take a little bit more research as far as like, how do I wire up buttons? How do I wire up, any weird thing that I want to use? But all of that is kind of out there. And so if you are interested in doing an arcade from scratch and you haven't started the game yet, I would seriously think about, including hardware as part of the design.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Just go with what you've got. And I think creating the game with unique controls really sets you apart from everybody else. I mean, myself included, we built a game with pretty standard controls because we love the game and we took inspiration from Galaga, so we want to stay true to it. But I just think a lot of the games you have in there are really unique. I mean, who makes a game with a keyboard? I don't know if you guys still have it or had it, Syntentable, like that, 100 buttons. Like, who wants to put 100 buttons on a cabinet? That's crazy. Let's talk about future plans for Wonderville. Obviously, you guys have been around for a couple of years. You had a rocky patch there. You guys are doing a lot better now. What do you want to see from the arcade in the future, and what do you hope to bring in for indie games? Because there's a lot out there that you still don't have.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And, really our limits are space, So I think we're going to probably have to start rotating games in and out. And so we're currently thinking about how we can best do that. Obviously, it would be a shame to put any of these indie games into storage because they're unique, one-of-a-kind experiences. And so being able to showcase them, even if they're not at Wonderville, at another space would be a goal. And so, we work with the nonprofit Death by Audio Arcade, and we're kind of negotiating with other venues to be able to like rotate some new games in and maybe bring our games to other spaces. We have Nidhogg 2 on the way, which is the first game we're getting from Dan at DSM Arcade, which is super exciting. There are so many indie games, and I wish we could have them all, but I just don't know that we have the space. And we want to build more games as well. We have a couple in the works, some grant projects. So that's been really exciting. And so, yeah, it's all a question of like where things can go. And I think, lately I've been thinking a lot about controllers. The developers of Typing Party released a game called Trombone Champ, which has been blowing up the internet lately. And I designed a trombone controller, as did a bunch of other crazy people on Twitter. So we had an event where we set up Trombone Champ on the stage and we let people come up and play it with the custom trombone controller. And so that was really exciting. And, the trombone can just like hang on the wall when it's done. We don't have to like find space for it. So even building like controllers has been exciting, even if it's not a full scale arcade cabinet.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely a unique controller. You're not going to find a lot of trombone controllers out there in the wild. So that's one of a kind there. That's really all I had for you, Mark. I just wanted to kind of pick your brain on the indie space, see what you've kind of been up to, things like that. So let's just have you shout out Wonderville, like social medias. Where can people find you? Where can they follow along? Where can they poke your brain, like ask you questions?
Yeah. So Wonderville NYC on most social medias, Instagram, Facebook, Twitch. We have a Discord server. It's wonderville.nyc/Discord. And you can hop in. We have a bunch of game dev channels, arcade channels. And come drop by, say hi. If you find yourself in New York, come drop by the bar and say hello. There's events almost every night. We have a stage and we're booking shows. We have electronic music. We have rock bands. We have weird trombone champ parties. Swing by, say hello. If you have questions about arcade cabinets, I love talking about that stuff and I'd love to help.
Awesome. Well, I want to say thank you, Mark, for coming on here and talking about Wonderville and just kind of sharing your knowledge of the space of indie games and really how big it is. There are a lot more people developing than most people think. Most people find out about the space and they're like, oh, there's not that many. And then they see that there's really like 40, 50 games in the space. And to anybody that's still watching, if you found us on episode 1 or episode 99, thank you for joining in for the 100th episode. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you like what we're doing here at Indie Arcade Wave, so we can just keep growing the wave and we can all ride it together. But that's what we got for today. So until next time, peace.